If your goal is to build a personal brand and you are posting basically whatever you want every day, you're building a personal brand on quicksand. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to build content pillars so your audience listens to you and you never run out of content ideas. Let's rock and roll. So part one is all about the identity and audience connection. This is where you turn their problems and your expertise and you put them together into content pillars. This is often where people get confused because they talk only about the things that they're interested in instead of doing an intersection between what the actual ICP's problem is, or ideal customer profile, your audience, and what is the thing that you're really good at. The intersection of those two things becomes your content pillars. You also want to make sure that content pillars are not based on things that are super trendy right now. Content pillars are things that you can talk about for a very long time. It's things that you have expertise in, plus it's an audience core problem, both a want, a need, a psychographic, or a demographic issue that they have. This simple 3-part formula is a fantastic way to evaluate how strong your content pillar is. So a quick 3-step process of developing your core pillars are: step 1, list the top 3 to 5 core values that are at the very core of who you are as a person. You can also think about this as what you stand for as a human being. Step 2 is to list the top 3 to 5 things or niches that you are an expert in. Said differently, these are the top 3 to 5 things that you know very, very well and that you can talk about for a really long time. Step 3 is identifying your ICP, or again, ideal customer profile, your audience, the top 3 to 5 urgent needs that ICP needs and is going through at the moment. Said in other terms, these are the things and the problems that your ICP needs to get solved right now. And what you can do is you can set up a Venn diagram, a 3-part Venn diagram for your values, the things that you're good at, and also your ICP's needs or strong desires or strong wants. One little caveat here, though, is building a brand off of purely desire is very, very difficult to do. So you want to start with solving the urgent problems or the needs as opposed to the urgent wants. Once you've filled out that 3-part of the diagram, you can find where all 3 intersect. Once you have that, it gives you a very good idea of maybe the 2 to 3 different content pillars that you can start off with. As an example, from my own brand, I have a value of constantly improving and personal development. And then as far as what I'm really good at, I'm very good at transition moments and having a very consistent identity through those transition moments. So that's my expertise. And then in terms of what my audience wants or audience needs, it's how can we not crash and burn out of a mentality that's from the athlete perspective and into more of the professional world. And then, of course, this is something that I love talking about and can talk about forever. So there's that longevity piece. So 4 parts to the formula. Again, you have your values, you have what you're really good at, you have what your ICP needs right now, and then you also have just an extra tag on at the end, which is, can you talk about it for a long time, and are you okay creating content about it for months on end? Part 2 is talking about the different types of content pillars and actually the number of content pillars you want. No one in the audience may actually be able to identify what your content pillars are, but they should have a very good idea of the 3 to 5 focus points, which in the back end are your content pillars. More pillars does not equal a better brand. Fewer pillars, on the other hand, often equal much deeper authority in that particular space, especially if you think about a lot of the massive personal brands in and around the world, especially if you go on YouTube, you find that those people are only talking about a few different things, and they're only talking about them in very, very inch-wide, mile-deep type content strategies. 3 to 5 pillars is the optimal range for how many you should have, roughly speaking. You can always combine a couple if you need to. 1 to 2 content pillars means you're only going to be very unidirectional and your brand's going to be a bit boring after a while, particularly from a content creation standpoint. Anything over 5 content pillars gets a little muddy and people don't really know what you're supposed to be talking about. And that can get really confusing for the audience. But that 3 to 5 range is really, really beautiful in terms of a good balance between authenticity, but also specificity. And you want a bit of both when you're talking to a core audience who's going to be the majority of your ideal customer profile. You can think about content pillars in the context of a novel or a book. So the content pillars are the chapters of the book, and the book itself is your personal brand. So without your personal brand, the chapters are sort of meaningless because they're not really organized in a way that makes a lot of sense. And vice versa, your brand doesn't really make sense without these particular content pillars put in that specific order or that specific way. The most important thing here is that analogy really encapsulates what your personal brand is meant to be, and it's meant to be a sum of its parts and greater than the sum of its parts. So let's take the example of a former athlete brand. So pillar 1 could be something like mental performance. Pillar 2 could be career transitions. Pillar 3 might be leadership development. Pillar 4 might be social media fluency. And pillar 5 might be more than minutes played, which is essentially you are more than an athlete. All of those encapsulates things that really matter to an athlete at some point in their career. And those are all things that you can transfer outside of athletics as well. You can also think about that combination of 5 as these athletic principles, or the things that I'm learning within this athletic career, are transferred over to the business world. And those principles actually apply more to things outside of just the athletic world. If you're new to the content pillar idea, you might think about them in a little bit of a hierarchy. What that means is you'll have kind of a core 1 or 2 that get 40 to 50% of your effort most of the time. And those are the main core ideas that you're talking about. So for me, it's a core framework. It's things like athlete branding. It's things about personal identity and personal branding. Those are things and pillars that are very, very important to my brand. Then I have satellite pillars, or things that are sort of secondary, if you will. 1 or 2 of those may take up, let's say, 20% each of my time in terms of the content that's being produced. And then you have maybe a 5th pillar or even a 6th pillar that only get about 10% airtime when you're doing any sort of content or having conversations with people. This is a good way to think about it in terms of time allocation as well, because you want to focus the main content that you're going to talk about is going to be very easily associated with you when it's in that top position. So part 3 is the validation process. And this is really important. And I'm actually in this as we speak. So it's a bit of a meta concept, if you will. But the validation process is very important because some of your pillars, even though they are associated with your personal brand, might not necessarily be a topic that your audience really wants to know from you. It might be something that's not necessarily as relevant to your ICP. And so you want to filter down and test out all the different content pillars that you have in your head. So if you say, hey, I have 20 different ones that I want to test, and I've got 5 that I'm going to focus on for the next 6 months or next 3 months, you're going to get a really good idea, particularly when you're doing short form content and you're posting all the time. That's going to give you a really good idea and a very quick feedback loop for which content pillars actually make a dent and what people are really focused on and really interested in. So to give you an idea of what a content sprint or a pillar sprint might look like, let's even condense it down to a 30-day period. So let's say week 1, you're creating 7 pieces of content for pillar 1, week 2, 7 pieces of content for pillar 2, and week 3, 7 pieces of content for pillar 3. And then week 4, you're able to go back and say, okay, out of all of these weeks, which one actually made the most dent? Now, I probably wouldn't recommend going through each of those pillars in each successive weeks. I would mix and match some content over the course of a 3-week period, but only do 2 to 3 content pillars at a time, because otherwise people get super confused, particularly if you're trying to narrow down what your brand's actually going to mean in the grand scheme of the internet and your personal brand. So a couple things to look out for when you're doing this validation process is what content pillar gets the most engagement. And yes, hooks and all the little tactical things do really matter in these cases, but as long as you're maximizing and making those hooks and the content itself really good across the board, you're going to have a pretty good idea of which type of content is actually going to do the best. And so how you can think about it is from a numbers perspective, what's getting the most comments, what's getting the most saves, what's getting the most shares. Those are really, really important. Likes, of course, matter, but who is getting the most engagement and what content pillar is getting the most engagement. If you're not getting a ton of numbers, the second thing I would look out for is what is getting the most quality conversation starters happening. So if I post a piece of content and I'm used to getting, let's say, 10,000 views on an Instagram reel and it gets 3,000, however, it's got a bunch of comments or really interesting in-depth comments, that's a really clear sign to me, okay, there's a larger conversation here that could be really interesting and really important for the audience that I'm actually trying to go after. The third and probably fairly obvious thing you might look for is what actually is attracting my ICP as opposed to attracting some random follower. You don't necessarily want random followers followers. And you see this with channels who pivot to a much more business focus all the time, where their numbers, myself included, go from boots, which is very, very popular, to much more of a niche. I'm only looking for people who are interested in investing in their future and building personal brands, which is not going to be for everyone. And there's a very small percentage of the people who used to follow me or who are currently followers of mine who will probably unsubscribe and stuff because they are not interested in this new topic. But the people who are interested in this new topic are actually the people who I'm trying to speak to right now. Now, for those of you who are a little bit more in your feelings about the content thing, I will say that this is something you have to be careful of. Data is always more important than your feelings. You may really love pillar 1, let's say, but pillar 2, even though you don't like it as much, is absolutely crushing. You got to go with that because at the end of the day, that's what's going to build your business. Now, if you're going to try to build a personal brand and you have absolutely zero care in the world about how much money it makes you, or you're not interested in starting a business out of this, I wouldn't worry about it. So completely forget what I've just said. But for the majority of you who are trying to create a full income and own your future with your personal brand and be able to go and talk in front of people and write books and do content and help and impact the world in a really positive way, that obviously takes money to do, right? Business has to be net positive. And so in that way, you want to attract right people at the right time. The final piece of this iteration phase is really retiring or sort of maybe tabling a particular pillar if it doesn't do very well over a 60 to 90 day period, a 2 to 3 month period. So in that cycle, you've been able to test it for a reasonable amount of time, particularly with algorithmic based platforms like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. Those are going to be showing it to a bunch of different random people. And if your ICP still doesn't really get into that style of content, I would retire it, shelf it, maybe put it in the back burner for later, but you've got to get rid of that so that you can make room for something that's actually going to make a tangible difference to your audience. So part 4 is the content banking system. Now, the banking system is very, very important and it goes along with batching content. So as we sit here, I will probably be filming 3 to 4 different videos literally right now, same background, same setup, and batching content is very important and it goes along with this content banking system. So obviously a pillar doesn't really mean anything unless you actually have a bank of content backed up, ready to go so that you can start filming or writing or whatever your medium is of communication with your ICP. And it really helps to make sure that you have all the right ideas as soon as you're ready to produce that content. And once you've validated that concept, like in section 3, we really want to make sure that, okay, now that I have this in a Google Doc or some type of file format, can I start to build out a bunch of different content ideas within that content pillar that marry those 3 things? So it's, okay, now I have the expertise. Now I have the synergy with what my ICP is looking for. I can talk about it for a really long time. Now there's a bunch of subtopics in that idea that you're going to be able to riff on for a very long time. So as some content ideas, here's 50 different things that you could talk about within a particular content pillar. Number 1 could be 10 myths I'm debunking. So things that are very quote unquote well known in a particular pillar, but you're actually going to debunk them because they're not true. Number 2 could be 10 lessons I've learned, and you can write down those 10 lessons, and that's 10 different categories of content and types of content that you could create within that pillar. Number 3 is 10 mistakes people make, and you could probably come up with 100 mistakes people make within your content pillar. If I want to talk about mental performance, I think there are 100 different things that I could talk about right now that would be mistakes that people make when it comes to mental performance. Number 4 could be 10 how-to frameworks. These are things like taking a 5 or 6 step process, operationalizing that, and putting it into a really creative formula for your ICP. And the 5th thing, you could do 10 contrarian takes. So this is things that people will argue with or disagree with in the comment section, which are amazing conversation starters. Now, don't be inauthentic. So don't create this contrarian take if you don't believe it. But if you do have a contrarian take and you're like, wow, market is going this way on something and I actually think the opposite of it, or I actually think something completely different, talk about it, because those are amazing conversation starters and they will create a ton of engagement with your content. So if you're going to create content on a daily basis and you're not going to batch stuff, what I would suggest doing is you pick a pillar for the day, you pick a content type within that pillar, you do some pre-scripting for that particular pillar idea, record it, edit it, upload it, and then make sure you are really paying attention to the response so that you can get that iteration period. And once you have those 3 to 5 different content pillars and you're creating really well in those content pillars, continue to iterate. If there's one that's not doing so well or falling behind, you want to make sure that you go over that just so that you can introduce something that's going to be more engaging for your audience and at the end of the day, more valuable. All right, so that is all the structures around what content pillars are, how do you create them, and how you make them a part of your brand and your brand strategy. If you guys are interested in more information about this, this is a very small topic in the athleadership community that I am building for athletes like yourself who are interested in taking that next step in their careers and creating a personal brand either while you're playing or after you have finished. And I'm very excited to have you guys in. We are going to start building your futures together. See you guys in the next video.